Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. Just making sure we got everything set up here. Awesome. So going to wait for a couple other people to join in here, make sure that everyone can log in. Tried to broadcast this to LinkedIn today, but it looks like that's not going to happen. So hopefully no one was trying to watch this on LinkedIn, but looks like we're live on Facebook, live on YouTube here. Just give a couple more minutes, everyone to join in. Hopefully everyone's having a good day. Hopefully people are busy. I know most of the shops I've been talking to around the country have, started to see a lot more people start coming out, seen some record months be set, seen some record weeks get set. I think there's a lot of people that are probably, missing a little bit of that downtime where you had a little bit of time to think, a little bit of time to breathe. So all in all, not too bad here. So let me make sure we got this. All right. This is the 7-1 meeting. It is. Hopefully you're in the right spot. So yeah, what are we going to get into today? So today we're going to get into the new forgiveness applications that they came out with. There's a number of people that have already probably reached the stage where they're eligible to apply for forgiveness. There's some people that have noticed that they are going to need to wait longer. We're going to kind of get into the two different applications that are out there. Who can use which one? We have an easy application and we have a regular long application. Gone is the 11-page application that they gave us before, and now we're replaced with a 5-page application and essentially a 1-page application if you're eligible to do the easy form. So the first thing that I've had, a lot of people asking about is, well, when do I apply for forgiveness? The first thing that we need to be doing with forgiveness is we need to be talking to our bankers, because at the end of the day, we're applying with our bank. And so I know that there's a lot of banks out there right now that are not even accepting applications yet. Some of the bigger banks, they are actually wanting to set up their own portal so that we're not going to be doing anything online. So before you go through and spend too much time on this, I would reach out to your banker and say, hey, when are we going to be able to apply for applications? When are we going to be able to start accepting this? Is there anything that you guys are going to need done differently? Just like with the PPP application process, most of the banks are pretty similar on how they wanted the application process to go. But all banks, most of the banks had a little bit of a different twist that they had on, depending on if they wanted to see some more information, they wanted you to do it on their portal, whatever it might be. So that's the first thing we need to do. Check with the bank and say, hey, when are we going to do this? The next thing we need to do is we need to figure out if we're going to be doing the 8-week period or the 24-week period, right? And so a lot of people have asked, and I've heard a lot of people say, well, I'm not at full forgiveness, but I just want to get this done on the 8-week period. I don't want to go to 24 weeks. Personally, there's really no reason to do that. If you're going to be at full forgiveness at 8 weeks, well over, not have to get into gray areas, not really close on it, then sure, go with the 8 weeks. There's no reason not to. However, if you are going to be over, or if you're not going to hit your full forgiveness in the 8 weeks, it's a no-brainer to take the full 24-week period or sometime in between there. Right? There's no reason to get this done early just to have the 8 weeks and have some of this loan not be forgiven. So we'll take our time and we'll do it over the 24 weeks. One of the questions I still haven't seen clarified is, by reading these applications, and we'll kind of see some of this stuff on there, it seems that we're going to be able to do this in between. It's not either 8 or the full 24 weeks. If we get 12 weeks in and we're able to go for forgiveness, or we've already satisfied for full forgiveness, we can go and we can submit our application in then. But the biggest thing that we're doing right now is making sure that we're keeping our records, making sure that we're keeping organized, making sure that we know where we stand so we know what to do next. All right. Perfect. So yeah, if you want to just share in the chat box, if anyone has already started the application process, if anyone has talked to their bank about what their banks are saying, I'd love to see the feedback on it and see what you guys are experiencing on your side of things. If you guys have any specific questions about anything that we go through, feel free to pop that in the chat. I will try to get to as many of those as possible. And if we have anything towards the end of this that that I didn't cover, I'll give you guys some time to answer some questions and stuff like that. All right. So let's get it on here. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen here. All right. And so hopefully you guys can see this, and hopefully it's not too small, but it's kind of a lot of text here. Rob, application not ready yet, coming soon. Yeah. So just want to show this over here. Rob said, application not ready yet, coming soon. Yeah, that seems to be a thing that a lot of banks have been saying, which is kind of funny because the applications are ready, right? These banks are acting like that they're having to make their own applications. They're ready, they're out there. The SBA is saying, hey, we're okay, we're ready to go. Yeah, and so we'll just have to see. I mean, like I said, I'm not in a huge urgency to do this. You know, we're 8 weeks are done. We don't have to make any payments on this for 6 months. So if my bank's not stressing on it, I'm not stressing on it. Let's focus on what we can change and, you know, making sure that we're being productive in the shop. And Alex gets a present for our first question here of the day. So we squeezed everything out in 8 weeks, but would have liked to run it longer, but it was already committed to spending the money. Can we just do the longer period or no? So really, it comes down to what you want to do, Alex. And so if you had to squeeze and you had to get into the gray areas and you had to maybe use some utilities that you don't really like too much to get that 8-week period, you by, you know, all means, you can go to the 24-week period. There's no election that we have to make. You know, really what I would be doing is telling my bank just to let them know is saying, hey, I'm taking the full 24 weeks, or I'm taking 12, or I'm taking 14 weeks. Because one of the benefits of that is, you know, the easier we can make our life and the easier we make the banker's life is going to be, you know, the best way forward. So if we can get to 12 weeks in and we say, all right, we've spent all of this money on payroll, we're just going to have to give them the payroll reports and we're done with this. Versus if you had to squeeze everything on 8 weeks and we're going to have to give them telephone, internet, security, we're going to have to give them all this backup documentation. We're just creating a lot of unnecessary work for ourselves with no real benefit. So as long as you haven't applied for your forgiveness, which I doubt you have, you know, you can go to the longer period, of course. Some other things here from what bankers are saying. We are currently awaiting additional guidance from the SBA as it relates to the recent passage of bipartisan blah, 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 blah. Yeah, so Charlie, I'm not sure if that was a banker or an attorney. That seems like, you know, kind of a boilerplate answer, which is kind of funny because, you know, most of this stuff was released on June 16th that really kind of finalized almost everything. There's still a couple weird areas. There's still some areas for interpretation on it. I don't foresee a lot of this stuff getting clarified. If you guys remember the original PPP application, there's still uncertainties. You know, there's people on this right now that got approved with 1099 employees when we know that they're not allowed. There's some people that we are not going to, there's some people that got shorted money when they should have got it. You know, and I think that if we're looking to have an application that has 0 questions on it, that's just never going to happen. All right. Kareem, hey Kareem, how are you? So we started putting together this plan of a lot of things that we need to do. Do you know where we could get a list of the various inputs needed to make this happen? Yeah, and so I'll show you on this, Kareem, and then email me afterwards. I have a documentation list. I'm guessing you're talking about what type of backup documents you need, and they give us a pretty good list here. When I go down through these different categories on the forgiveness, I'll kind of give a quick overview of what the bank's going to want to see. All right. So let me see here. True, we got a lot of, almost sudden we got a lot of comments coming in. Hey, Brian, what if we overpaid owners to spend it on 8 weeks? And so if you overpay the owners, then we now know that that's not allowed. So if you overpaid yourself more than what you're averaging last year, then we're only going to be able to use that last year's average for this year's forgiveness. If you're still at full forgiveness at 8 weeks, then fine, go for it. If you're not going to be at full forgiveness because of that planning that we, you know, are no longer able to use, then go for the 24 weeks. All right. So what I'm going to do, let's see. I got too much stuff going down through here. Nancy, good question. I'll get to that one. Nancy's asking about people to go and have husband having cancer. We're going to use the EZ form. So we'll get into all that stuff. So let me do this. I'm going to start diving into these forms, which ones we can do, which one that we can't use. And so any questions that I don't address on those, I'm going to stop here at the end and just open this up for some questions here. All right. So let me hide this. Cool. So really, we got 2 different options here. We have what they call the 3508 EZ and the 3508 application for forgiveness form. One of them is obviously the EZ form. It's a simplified form, and one of them is a longer form. Now, one of the questions that it was asked here is, who can apply for the EZ form? And so I'm going to pull this up so that I can read it. Hopefully you guys can read it. I think if you maximize it. Let me see. Yeah, we can read it. It's not so big. Hopefully you guys got your readers on. All right. So in order to qualify for the EZ form, you need to be able to check one of these boxes. The first one is one that's not going to apply to very many people, probably no shops out there unless you're truly a one-man show. And so the first one is the borrower is a self-employed individual, independent contractor, sole proprietor, had no employees at the time of PPP application, and didn't include any employees. So if you're just a sole proprietor, just a one-man show, then you can do this EZ form. You didn't have any employees. It's just fairly simple. Most people are not going to be able to check that box. And remember, we don't need to check all these boxes. We just need to be able to check one of these boxes to qualify for it. The next one is the borrower did not reduce any salary or hourly wages of any employee more than 25% during a covered period or alternate covered period compared to January through March 31st, 2020. For this purpose, employees means that only employees that didn't make more than $100,000 a year. And they did not reduce the number of employees or the average paid hours of employees by the end of the covered period. The next one is very similar. If you read, the first part is exactly the same, but then the other option is if you were unable to rehire, your business was unable to come back to the same volume it was before because you were shut down between Health and Human Services, CDC, stuff like that. Now, I know that there's a lot of people that would say, well, I was somewhat shut down, right? Because the rest of the country was shut down. I don't see any shops qualifying for this level 3 one because we're essential service industries. So no one actually had to close. The only thing is if you had a situation where you had to shut down or quarantine and that affected some of the pays, then maybe this is it. But really for most people, we're going to be looking for this number 2. Right? We're going to say, hey, we had the same or more amount of employees during a covered period, and we didn't reduce anyone's salaries. And so one thing to keep in mind here is it doesn't matter if between, when all this stuff started to go terribly wrong and we got our PPP application, there's plenty of people out there that laid off employees. There's plenty of people out there that cut wages, cut hours, and stuff like that. We are talking about the end of the covered period, right? The end of the covered period. That is the really important thing that we're looking at right now. And the covered period is when we had the PPP. And so what they're looking for is they're saying, all right, let bygones be bygones. When you got the PPP money, did you restore people's salaries, wages, and employment levels to what you had before? If you came into this and you had 8 employees, you fired 4 of them, you had your PPP and you went back up to 8 employees for the covered period, we're good to go. You don't have to have 8 employees for the entire period. You had to have 8 employees by the end of the covered period. Now, another thing that's a little bit strange on here is if you'll see, you can read through this, if you weren't able to increase your weight or your employees, you need to do so by December 31st, 2020. All right. And so one of the things that gets a little bit tricky here is, let's say I'm going to use myself as an example. I have a shop. I had 8 employees coming into the year. I got my PPP. My 8 weeks of PPP forgiveness is over. I only was able to bring back 6 employees. Okay. I am trying to find another couple of employees. There's some gray areas where I'd say I wouldn't even qualify for a reduction because I'm trying to find candidates and I can't find suitable candidates. But let's just say that I'm being cheap right now and I don't want to find 2 employees. Even though my 8-week period is over, I have till December 31st to go back to full employment levels. But I don't want to apply for forgiveness until I'm at full employment levels because I don't want to be penalized for it. And so if I'm at 8 employees or I'm at 6 employees right now, but next week I go out and I hire 2 more employees, perfect. Now I'm back up to 8 employees. I'm where I was before. Next week and I can apply for this PPP forgiveness and I will not have any penalty for reducing wages. I can use the EZ form. Now, you are not guaranteeing that these people have a job forever. You're not guaranteeing that these people even have a job for the next couple months. It's saying when I applied for this application or by December 31st, whichever is earlier, I had the same or more amount of employees on payroll. You can kind of see how I don't foresee any people out there not being able to use the EZ form, right? Because it's not saying that we never got rid of people. It's saying that we got back to the amount of people that we had before. And so if you didn't reduce any of your employees' wages by more than 25% while you were paying them the PPP, and then also you went back up to the same amount of employees either by the application date or the end of the year, we're going to be fully forgiven. Okay? So realistically, I think that most people will be able to fall into one of those situations and be able to use the easy application. Obviously, if you just are completely changing your business, you're not going to rehire the same people. You continue to reduce people's salaries and then never even increase it later on down the road. You will have to go and do the long form. But I would say 99% of people are going to be able to use this easy application. All right. Perfect. So that is kind of what qualifies for the easy application. I would just really imagine that I don't see anyone doing the long form. I'm going to show you guys the long form. The long form is honestly even confusing for me, and that's one of the most frustrating things about this is I'm an accountant. I do numbers all the time. I've been doing this for a long time. And if I'm confused by the long form, what do you think that the general business owner out there is thinking? This is stuff that was supposed to be able to be done by a business for a business without any outside help. The long form just really makes it a little bit overcomplicated with kind of nondescript formulas, not very good instructions, a lot of kind of ambiguity to it. Luckily for us, this easy form that I'm going to show you is very, very straightforward, and I don't think that people will have any issues with it. So let me go to this one. I'm going to stop sharing that. And then we're going to go here. All right. Now we should be able to see this on here. Perfect. So now we are looking at the easy application. All right. So the easy application from the top is going to be very straightforward. It's very similar to what we were looking at in the past here. And so right up top, we're going to have, standard stuff, business legal name, right? I think you guys can figure that out. DBA if you have so, business address, tax ID number, phone number, primary contract email address. Nothing tricky about that. Put all that stuff in, we move on. SBA PPP loan number. So we got an SBA PPP loan number from the SBA when we applied for that. There's going to be a separate one that you need to get from your lender. You should have both of that on your loan documents. If you don't have that, even if you're not going to go for forgiveness right now, I'd reach out to your banker and get that information so when the time comes, you can fill this out. Next, we're putting on there is PPP loan amount and then the loan disbursement date. And then the next thing we're going to do on here is we're going to put employees at the time of application and employees at the time of forgiveness application. Okay. So here's one of the things that was the question that was asked a lot is I filled out my PPP loan application and I put 12 employees on there because I included part-timers. Realistically, when I applied for my PPP, I really only had 9, not 12. What we didn't know in the past is if we're going to be able to change that or if we're going to be locked at 12. We are going to have a clean slate here. If you did it wrong in the past, we're going to be doing it right now. So employees at the time of application, employees at the time of forgiveness. We want that to be the same or more, right? Because we don't want that to decrease because we'll be penalized. If you are not at the same or more right now, then I would not do this application until you are at the same or more. There's no reason to rush this if you're not going to be at full forgiveness or you're not going to be penalized, okay? The next thing on here is the EIDL advance amount. So this is not going to be your loan. This is not going to be the EIDL loan. This is not going to be the $150,000, $500,000, depending on how much you got. This is going to be the grant portion. And then we're also going to put the application number in here. One of the things that you'll notice is that this is the only spot that they have mentioned the EIDL. Remember when we talked about this way back in the beginning, I said that, yes, we're going to take that grant money, but we're going to set that grant money aside because it's going to come off of the forgiveness amount. For some reason, they decided to not do that on this actual application. I think they were probably smart and they tried to make it less complicated. But what's going to happen is that the Treasury or the SBA is going to contact you directly and let you know that you owe that EIDL advance back amount back, or it's going to be turned into a loan. For those of you out there that just got the grant money, that got no other idle loans like the true 30-year loans, you're going to get a notification to say, hey, you have until this time to pay back the grant, or we're going to turn it into a loan. For those of you out there that got the idle loan, the $150,000, what I imagine that they're going to do is they're going to just add that onto your loan amount. So if you got $150,000 from the idle loan and you got a $10,000 grant, when they finally start sending those statements out, I would have to imagine that they're going to come out and they're going to say, hey, you owe us $160,000. Okay. So let's go down here to the next thing. Payroll schedule. Fairly straightforward. How often do you pay? Weekly, bi-weekly, twice a month, monthly. Okay. Next one is covered period. So covered period is going to be the default covered period. And so remember we were talking about before, if you're doing 8 weeks, it'd be 8 weeks starting the day that you got the money. The spreadsheet that you guys are using a lot will give you that covered period. We obviously know that the date that you got the money, which would be the start of the covered period. And then we know the last day of the 8th or 24th week, which will be the end of the covered period. The next option there is for an alternative payroll covered period, if applicable. If you have decided to push back your start date to the first start of a payroll, we saw that for a lot of people that either had to bring back a significant amount of employees and it wasn't going to work on their first payroll, or if you do something like biweekly or semi-monthly that it just wasn't going to work, you could actually push back that alternative payroll period so that it started on your next subsequent payroll. If you decide to use that option, then obviously put in those dates there. If a borrower, together with affiliates, has received more than $2 million in PPP loans, check here. If that's a situation for you, I would highly, highly, highly doubt that you're going to be able to fill the easy application out. So it's probably not going to qualify for anyone here. All right. So let's get into the major line items here. All right. So the first one on here. So you will notice that this is a lot more streamlined than the initial one that we came out. Essentially what we're seeing on this page is the end all be all of the forgiveness application. This is it. There's nothing else. There's no schedule. There's no tables. There's nothing else. This is where it all goes in. So the first thing that we need to do on here is we need to put our payroll costs in. How much do we spend on payroll? I saw this question here before, so I'm going to pop this on here. Deb asked a good question. On the easy application, it does not include payments for my health insurance unless I should include my payroll costs. My numbers are off if I don't include health insurance. Great, great, great question, Deb. And so just like on the original PPP application, if you remember, it just said payroll costs. But then when you read the instructions, payroll costs are going to be gross wages, state unemployment, health insurance benefits paid on the employee's behalf, right? The employer pays for it. And then retirement contributions made on the employee's behalf. So all of those costs together would go into the payroll cost. Okay, if you go down through the, either if you are tracking on the spreadsheet, you can total up all the cells that are including payroll, health insurance, or retirement, or you can manually go down and pull the payroll records and pull the health insurance or retirement. But we're going to put that total cost in there right now. Okay. Business mortgage interest payments. Almost no one is going to be able to do this. Only time that you're going to be able to do business mortgage interest payments is if your business actually owns the real estate as well. If that is the case and you were still paying it, then you can use those interest amounts that you paid. That's pretty straightforward. If you had it for 2 months, 2 months worth of interest, we're going to have the loan statements and stuff like that. Which reminds me here. So one of the things that people asked about before is what should we have here for documentation? So for the payroll costs, they want for payroll, they either want to see canceled checks or check stubs or a payroll report. Obviously, for the payroll costs, the easiest thing for us is going to be the payroll report, right? Just pull out your payroll summary, whether you use our payroll, ADP, Paychex, pull the payroll report summary for that period. There you go, you're done. Health insurance and retirement, we can either use canceled checks or we can use a copy of the invoices that were paid. Okay. Rob, how about disability and life insurance? No, sir, we cannot use disability or life insurance. Life insurance is a non-deductible expense almost always, so we'd never get to use that. And disability, very few times people pay for it for an employee. Usually the employee is paying that, but again, does not count. Fortunately for you, I mean, the disability stuff should be relatively cheap, but not an allowable expense. Okay. So like I said, we got mortgage interest payments. Documentation for that would just be the mortgage statements or a canceled check, or maybe possibly both of those. Business rent or lease payments is the next one on here, right? And so anything that we're paying ourselves to rent, right? If we're paying landlord, that's eligible expense for there. If we're renting equipment, again, that's going to be an allowable expense there. What they would like to see is they either want to see a copy of the lease or the lease agreement, which would satisfy the requirement, or they want to see the canceled checks. If it was me, and I'm still not at the forgiveness portion, and my bank is not giving me a whole lot of direction, I'm probably pulling the lease and I'm probably pulling the cancel check so that I have it. I don't know how much they're going to look into this. I think that this is going to be where banks differ. Some of them are going to want to see a ton of documentation. Some of them are probably not going to, but usually the more the merrier. All right. And then the last one on here is business utility payments, right? So we're going to add up all of our utility payments that we've made over the period, and we're going to put that total in there. For the business utility payments, again, we need to either see canceled checks or the actual bills from the utilities. Got a question here. So Jackie here had a question about S Corp health insurance. So we are an S Corp health insurance and owning 100% of the stock. Both he and I work at the shop full time. We both get health insurance. I've heard the owners and later family members' health insurance may not be allowable. This is true. Is this true? And so this is kind of going back and forth. I've seen some places where they're saying that it's not allowed whatsoever, and I've also seen places where it is allowed. But it's when you're an S Corp officer, that has to be on your W-2, so it would actually go against your wages, and so it could come into a limiting situation. If it's me and that's gonna make or break me being able to get the forgiveness application at 8 weeks, then I probably would even stress about it. I'd probably go to the 24 weeks. Hey, Darren. So for simplicity, I can just use the PPP money for payroll until it's used up, as long as it's used within 24 weeks, right? That way, just the payroll reports will suffice for the whole thing. Exactly right. So Darren made a really good point here that a lot of people, and I've been recommending to some people as well, you kind of heard me talk about all the documentation that we'd have to get if we used all of these, right? If we're going to use payroll, we get to use the payroll reports. That's an easy one. Mortgage interest, rent, leases, utilities, that's going to be a lot of paperwork. If we had to go get the canceled checks, we had to get the statements, we had to get the bank statements. If we can just use the full 24 weeks, I don't see any shop that's not going to be able to use all of this on payroll. And if we're going to use it all on payroll, we only need to fill out line one. Hey, you gave us $100,000. We used $150,000 on payroll. We're done. We're over with here, right? So not a bad idea if you want to go down that road. See, Jordan answered it for you, Darren. See, Jordan, you should be on here doing this for me. You can save me some time, right? Got another question here. Hey, Jenny, if our payroll far exceeds the amount of PPP during a 24-week period, do we even bother listing out the rent utilities on a forgiveness form? I would not, right? If we're at 150,000 of payroll and you get 100,000, then rent utilities I'm not even going to include. Even if I'm doing this on an 8-week period and I'm adding up my payroll and my rent, and that is over my forgiveness amount, I'm probably not even going to put my utilities in there, because then I don't have to give you all the documentation. If I don't need it, then we're not going to use it. Gary, if you are 10 to 15% short of expenses allowed, do you get forgiveness for the 85% that you used? Yeah, essentially, you would get partial forgiveness if you wanted to do so. But if you're only at partial forgiveness and you're at 8 weeks, just go to 24 weeks and you'll be well over it. So yes, but it's not like use it or lose it. It's not like, hey, Gary got $100,000 and he used 85,000 of it. You only use 85, Gary, you got to give us the full 100 back. No, it'll be partially forgiven. Ken, any chance of forgiveness rules will change if we wait and go for the 24 weeks? Great question, and something that's been tossed around a lot. Yeah, I mean, look at what's been going on throughout the year. I mean, we know that there's a good chance that some of this stuff is going to be changed. But every single thing that we've been seeing, even from this application, from the rules, is actually the loosening of restrictions, right? It's saying, all right, well, because when this first started, it was if you fired someone, you had to hire back that exact same person. If you didn't, you were going to be penalized for it. Now they've relaxed it and they said, well, you can hire back maybe, a similar employee. Now they're saying you can hire back anyone unless you can't find someone. If you can't find someone, hey, at least you tried. So I would say that there's a chance that the rules change, but if anything, it's going to be more in our favor. If we're not going to be at full forgiveness at 8 weeks, then we're going to use the 24 weeks anyways. But if you're already at full forgiveness for 8 weeks and you're concerned about it, just go ahead and file it and be done. I think Darren and Jordan have taken over my stream here. All right, so let's go down here. Let's move down to the other parts here of this forum, and really one line here on that I want to kind of stress on because it's been tripping up a lot of people right now. And so the potential forgiveness amount is the next section that we're going to talk about here. And we can see line 5. Line 5, all we're going to do is we're going to add up lines 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? So like we were talking about before. In this situation, we're going to say that we used $100,000, right? And so we have $100,000 of PPP money between payroll, interest, rent, utilities. We used $120,000. So now we're going to add all that up, and line 5 is going to be $120,000. Line 6 is going to be $100,000 because that's where we're going to put our PPP amount. Now this line 7 is really where it's tripping some people up here. Payroll cost 60% requirement, right? And so what they're trying to do is they're trying to make sure that you used at least 60% of it on payroll. If you remember before, that used to be 75%. Now it's down to 60%. And so what you need to do is you need to take line 1 divided by 0.6, all right? Divide line 1 by 0.6. What's been tripping up a lot of people right now is that they will go down through this and they're saying, well, hey, how am I ever going to be at full forgiveness because I'm only getting 60% of my payroll? No, it's actually the exact opposite. And so let's say that our line 1 was $60,000. Line 7 would then be $100,000, right? Because we're testing to make sure we spend at least $60,000 on payroll, or at least 60% on payroll. So once we do all 3 of these lines, we're going to then go to line 8, which is going to be our forgiveness amount. And we're going to say, what is the smaller of line 5, 6, and 7, right? And so let's do a situation. So if line 5 is the smallest, that means that we didn't spend at least as much as the PPP amount is. Hopefully, we would just tear up this application or we've done something wrong because we would not be at full forgiveness. If line 6 was the smallest amount, which is our PPP loan amount, we're good. We're ready to go. We're ready to file because that means we're at full forgiveness, right? If line 7 was your lowest amount, first, double check your math. Make sure that you're not doing that wrong. And second, I would take a look at it because that means that you haven't spent at least 60% of your PPP money on payroll. For a shop, I've never seen a situation where you wouldn't have spent at least 60% on payroll. So more than likely, it's probably a math error there. Really, we're going to be looking at 5 and 6, making sure we at least spend enough money on the PPP stuff. All right, let's get into some questions here before we go into the second part of this and then touch a little bit on the long application. I'm not going to do a ton on it because I hope that no one will have to use this. All right, let's see here. If we can use 100% for payroll during 24 weeks, but we've already done bank transfer for other items, does that mess up when we're trying to prove what the money was used for? So no, it doesn't, because I've only heard of one bank out there that is actually making you pay specifically out of that payroll account. You'll notice that nowhere on this do they say, hey, you need to show us where you use this money out of the PPP funds. They're just saying, hey, Brian, did you use money for payroll? If you pay for these eligible expenses or these forgivable expenses throughout the 24 weeks, we are going to count it towards you, whether or not you paid out your PPP or not. Really, the biggest thing we were doing the transfers and setting the money aside was for tracking, because 8 weeks was going to be tight. Now that 24 weeks is in play, it's all out the window. We're going to be at full forgiveness and we don't really have to worry as much about the tracking. Deb, if we are at full forgiveness at 8 weeks, but another outbreak shutdown comes along, we'll be able to apply again for more forgiveness money. No idea, right? We don't know if there's going to be another shutdown. We don't know if there's going to be another round of money. I think that some of these states, probably some people on here have already started to see some tightening of the belt here around the states that they're in. And, they're going to start to, feel it a little bit. But I don't think that there's any PPP or any sort of plans on the horizon here. Personally, for me, I'm just hoping that we can kind of get back to the stage where we're able to, conservatively and healthily, open stuff back up, and we can kind of get away from doing these PPP and the stimulus and let our economy get back. I think that if we had another massive round of PPP and stimulus, that would, the long-term effect of that would be, pretty terrible. But that's kind of the economics side of it for you. All right. So I received 5,000 EIDL grant and 100,000 PPP loan. When I use the 24 weeks, I'll well exceed that 105,000. Will I still need to pay back that 5,000? So Jackie, you're going to be looking for the 100,000. When you're doing this application, that $5,000 gets listed at the top, but does not go into any of the forgiveness stuff anywhere else. Okay. And so the most forgiveness that you'll ever be able to get is 100,000. Even if you spent the $5,000 on whatever you were supposed to, it's not going to be forgiven. Okay. Is the forgiven PPP funds to be considered income for our tax year? As of right now, it is going to be considered. That's something that we could see changing, but as of right now, it will be taxable. Scott, that formula is wrong. 100,000 divided by 0.6 equals 166,000. That is correct. But what I was talking about is I was saying if you spent $60,000 on payroll, 60,000 divided by 0.6 is going to be 100,000. But you're exactly right, Scott. Talking about payroll, can we include the state and federal tax payment for that payroll? So that's kind of a little bit tricky question there. So state and federal taxes, it really depends on what we're talking about. But when we have allowable payroll costs, that's going to be gross wages, right? So if someone makes $100,000 a year, that's going to be $1,923 a week. So we'll be able to use that amount. And then we'll also be able to use the state unemployment. Okay, it has no effect on withholdings, and then same effect, we're not going to be able to include the employer's portion of FICA and Medicare. All right. So let's go back over here to this screen. And so I'm going to hide this one. And so like I said, that's it. All of these, this is all the places we're going to put any of the numbers here. So we get to our forgiveness amount. As far as numbers go, we are completely done. And then we come over here to the second page, and we have a lot of initials we need to go by. This is all the stuff that we talked about. Hey, I used this money for at least 60%. I used it during a covered period. I didn't pay anyone that I wasn't supposed to. I didn't use it for unauthorized purposes. I didn't cut anyone's hours. I didn't cut anyone's employees. I have verified the payments. I've submitted to the lender verifying payroll costs. We got a penalty of perjury statement. I submitted everything that is, in fact, with the IRS and workforce. Pretty much it's just saying all kinds of stuff like, hey, do not lie to us. And if you do lie to us, now you've signed something that said that you didn't lie to us. And then we have another initial thing down here, just like we were talking about before. I did not reduce the amount of employees, or I restored them, or I reduced the amount of employees, but because of, CDC or Health and Human Services, I was not able to come back with, the full staff. You need to initial one of those. More than likely, you're going to be initialing this first one here. And then we sign it, print it, title it, date it, and we're done. So we'd give them this, we give them the documentation reports that we talked about, and we're done. That's it. Fairly easy, a lot easier than what we were looking with that 15-page monstrosity that we were talking about before. All right. So let me see here. I'm going to grab some questions here. We're going to hop onto the long form real quick, and then I'll just open it up for the next form. Hey, Rob. So the grant was to be forgiven. Has that changed? And so it's a bit of a shell game that they played on us here. So the grant itself is forgivable. It's not going to be part of it. But what they're going to say is that the PPP forgiveness amount is reduced by the grant amount. So if we got 100,000 PPP, $5,000 of grant money, then it's true. Yeah, that $5,000 of grant money is going to be forgiven, but now we're only going to get 95% or 95,000 forgiven on the PPP side. It's kind of weird how they did it, but yeah. Can you explain why you said weeks ago that this grant will be taxable income? I believe we're not entering the grant money in sales on my S Corp and 1040 returns. I understand we can't expense a PPP cost because it's grant money, which would be double dipping. Why I said to go that this grant would be taxable income? Kind of confused in your question there, Jim. So the grant money, if you're talking about the EIDL grant money, the EIDL grant money is not going to be taxable. It's going to be the PPP forgiveness. And really, the PPP forgiveness is not going to be taxable income, but we're not going to be able to use the expenses that we use for the PPP money, which in turn makes it taxable income. All right. Kareem with a good little thing. I wanted to share that as well. Yeah, for anyone that hasn't got the PPP application in there yet, I think almost everyone has. I mean, you have to be kind of living under a rock if you hadn't got your application in yet. But that was set to expire yesterday to do new PPP applications. Now you got till August 8th to do it. Yeah, I mean, there's still some money left over there. Hey, Mary. Can you please repeat your response to owner's payroll being included in total payroll if they're 100% stock owner? Yep, 100%. If you're owner of the business, you're an employee just like anyone else. The only difference with owner's payroll is that you can't give yourself a wage more than what you made last year. But if you're on it normally, if you or Jack was making the same wage this year as you were last year, we're 100%, we're good to go. Chris, if we use the 24-week but actually need 10 or 12 weeks, do we still enter the dates in the easy as the whole 24 weeks under the covered period? Good question. To me, yes, I would, right? Because that's technically what the covered period is, but we're able to apply before, and obviously all the substantiating records, we could never give them anything in the future. Let's just use this for example. If we're 12 weeks in and we're at 120,000, we borrowed 100. Here's my payroll report that shows that we're already over the forgiveness. Why are you going to make me wait another 12 weeks when I've already satisfied it? So yeah, you're okay. Hey, Mark, what if I had one tech that got paid slightly over 100,000 due to being fair and that we paid our flat rate techs their prior average? So you're fine. If someone's making $100,000 or more, they're not subject to the reduction. And if you paid them more than $100,000 or $1,923 a week, 100% fine and allowable. We just can't use more than $1,923 for forgiveness for a week. Hey, Becky, I missed the beginning. What is the EZ form called? The EZ form is called the 3508 EZ form. If you just search PPP EZ forgiveness, you'll see it'll come up as the first on there. Justin, owner's distributions are considered income against PPP or no? It depends. If you are a sole proprietor, then your draws or your income for last year is considered wages. If you're a partnership, the amount of money that you showed on your K-1s is considered your wages. If you're an S corporation, distributions have no effect on PPP. Scott, if our original PPP application did not include owner's salary, which we didn't pay last year except on Schedule C, and we lost some employees, should we change or update our PPP application for more money? So unfortunately, you can't. I think that I just actually got into this situation with one of my clients whose bank actually gave him some bad information, and they were shorted about $20,000. And so I've had other clients that were able to go back and get more money for legitimate reasons. But the bank came back, or I think the Treasury came back and said you got 21 days since the application was approved to come back for an increase. If it's past the 21 days, then you cannot go back for an increase. Kirsten, good question here. We are an S Corp. Both my husband and I are on payroll. We gave ourselves a raise on January 1. How will that affect us now? And so whatever you guys averaged last year for payroll is going to be the same amount that you need to use for this year. And so if you guys each made $52,000 last year, you guys were averaging $1,000 a week. And so that would mean for the 8-week period, you guys would only be able to include $8,000 for each of you for forgivable expenses. If you guys were paying $8,000 a week to yourselves, that's great, but we're still only going to be able to use that $1,000 for the forgivable amount. You don't have to pay it back. You don't do anything like that, but it's just going to lower down the amount that you're going to be able to use for forgiveness. Okay. All right. So let me go here, and I'm going to pull up the final big long application, and we will take a look at that. All right. So you guys should be able to see this now. So this is the extended application. We're going to kind of skip through this part because this is all exactly the same. We're going to skip through this part because this is all exactly the same here. Really, the biggest difference here is going to be these lines here, 5, 6, and 7. Okay. Remember, we're only going to do this if we didn't increase our payroll or we didn't maintain our headcount or restore it by a certain date, and we reduced people's salaries and we didn't restore that either. Again, I don't see very many people being in this situation, but for those of you that are, I'm going to do a very, very quick overview of this. Okay. So the first one that we're going to have an adjustment for is salary wage reduction. And then for that, we need to go to Schedule A. So if we go down to Schedule A, we see here that the cash compensation here is going to be included here. But then what you actually need to do is you need to go down to this worksheet A. On this worksheet, you're going to put each employee's name. If you have more than, 7 employees, you're going to need to do a separate schedule. And then you're going to need to do the amount that you paid them, their social security number, how many hours they're working, and then their salary or wage reduction. This, honestly, if you are in a situation where you think that you need to use this, this could be a whole 3-hour webinar in itself. It's kind of complicated. I shouldn't say that. It's very complicated. But essentially, if you say, all right, I paid my person 60%, or 40% less than they were making before, they make 60% of what they made before, we know that that's worse than 25% decrease than they'll allow. And so if someone was making $1,000 a week before and they're now making $600 a week, then we would need to put $150 in here because we went from $750, which is the minimum allowable that we would be able to decrease it, down to $600. And so if it was $150 over 8 weeks, we would put that total in here for the amount of reductions. Okay, so this table is going to be for anyone that made less than $100,000. If you made more than $100,000, you would be using this table. Okay, you can see that there's no salary or hourly wage reduction for people that make over 100. They're essentially exempt from it. Okay, so that's the reduction of wages. Again, like I said, it gets very, very complicated, and it would really take too long to be able to show you these calculations. There's stuff out there to do it. If you need questions on that, just reach out to me, reach out to your accountant, and kind of get into that a little bit more in depth. The next thing that you're going to do here is so this all has to do with the cash compensation. This has to do with our average full-time employees. And then we're going to be able to do health insurance, retirement plan, taxes. So just like before, we're all using the same things. It's just going to be a bit more of an expanded version here. And then we go down here. And so this is going to be when we're getting penalized for a reduction in pay, right? So if we had to reduce pay, this is where we're going to figure out how much that reduction is going to be. Now, if we had a reduction in headcount, like I said before, that we weren't able to restore, which hopefully is not going to be the case for anyone, we would go here. And so this is average FTEs during the reference period, total average FTEs, and then the reduction. So we divide line 12 by line 11. Okay, so if we went from 10 employees down to 9, we would then be a 10% reduction, and that would in turn come up here to line 7, and that would be a 10% reduction. Okay, so if we didn't reduce anyone's wages, but we just reduced headcount, we're going to do everything the same, and then we'd have a 10% reduction here, right? Or we'd multiply times 0.9, same thing. Everything else being the same. If you kept the same amount of employees, then we would have nothing, no adjustment here, and we would just have a straight reduction for the amount of wages that we reduced below the allowable amount. Okay, this one is, like I said, this one can get very complicated. Depends on how many people you have. It's kind of notoriously tricky to be able to figure out. And there's also kind of a lot of gray areas on if commission-based employees count or if they don't count. Because a lot of technicians, if you're flat rate, it's saying, well, I didn't really reduce their hours. I reduced the amount of wages. They just did less work. Am I going to get penalized for that or not? We don't have a ton of clarification on that. If you're in a situation where you think that you need to use the long form, my best piece of advice is I would wait until we're at a point where we can satisfy the requirements to use the EZ form. It's just going to save a lot of time, money, and trouble, really. Cool. All right. So that is kind of a quick overview on it. We're kind of 50 minutes in here. I'm going to open this up for some other questions. See anything else that we have. Allison, I believe all of these forms that I shared here today, whether it's the applications, long to short form, and then also the instructions that I share, I think Allison will be sharing that all on our Facebook page, so you guys will be able to download it there. But yeah, just going to kind of open up. Any questions, comments, concerns, go for it. This is your time. I know we got one or two here. I was hoping we had at least one person that had submitted an forgiveness application yet. Yeah, I mean, I've been listening to a number of bankers talk about this, and every single banker has pretty much agreed on it that, if you give us the proper documentation, we're not going to be looking that hard into trying to make this not forgivable, right? These banks have a vested interest to get this thing forgiven. We just need to do our part to stay organized and give them a complete package to make their life easier, right? There you go, Becky. You probably already said this, but do we fill out the form when we use up all of the funds, right? And so if we are at the end of the 8 weeks and we've used up all the funds, then yeah, we're going to go for the forgiveness form. If we need a little bit more time and we get 10 or 12 weeks in and our bank says that we're okay to apply in the interim, then fine, we're going to do it in 10 or 12 weeks in. I wouldn't jump the gun on it. If you're close, I wouldn't be jumping into the forgiveness. I would just be taking my time. Hey, Danny, do banks have to accept applications at 10 or 12 weeks? Do they legally? I don't know. I would really want to be getting into that sort of match with my bank. I'd probably be trying to stay on my bank's good side here because, my forgiveness kind of is banking on them, no pun intended, being cooperative with me. And so at this point, I'm being as nice as I can to my banker saying, hey, Mr. Banker, what can I do to make your life easier? Do you want me to do it now? Do you want me to wait to the end of the 24 weeks? You let me know what to do, and then we'll go from there. Most of the stuff that I talk about, the lingo, there's nothing against, doing interim, and there's a lot of verbiage in there that mentions interim. I'd have to imagine that these banks would want to get this stuff done so they don't have a massive, influx at the end of the 24 weeks. All right, now we've got some questions. On info on how to pay back the EIDL loan if we receive the funds but have decided that we don't want it based on all the fine print. Ken, that is a great question because I have no idea. I mean, as of right now, that's kind of the tricky part on this is, I have a lot of people that have got this money and said, hey, you know what, hon, I want to hold on to this for a couple months, but I might not need it. When the time comes, how do I pay this back? As far as I know, there's no way to pay that back as of right now. But that's something that I'm guessing that the SBA is, once they stop taking applications, they're going to start sending out more information on how we pay it back, whether we pay it back early or we set up our loan payments. Justin, EIDL loan funds can be used for payroll once PPP funds are gone. They can, but it's still going to lower down your PPP forgiveness. Essentially, the idle money you can use as you please. All right, I'm going to try and crank through these here. If we use payroll, do we submit each weekly payroll report and we just do one report for the whole period? I would just do one report for the whole period. Most payroll journal reports, you can either do it so it shows each payroll just in one report. Ask your bank on what they want to see. It's usually in our software, it's called a payroll detail, which shows gross wages and taxes. If you can get all of the information off the report to fill out the application, then use that and give it to your bank. You essentially want to give them enough documentation that they could verify all the stuff that you put on there if they wanted to. To be clear, at the end of 24 weeks, we must be at 60% payroll cost to be forgiven. Correct. So if you get to the end of 24 weeks, you need to have spent at least 60% of your PPP on payroll or more. If you spend 100%, great, but you need to spend at least 60%. My business is a 2-member LLC. I lost one employee prior to COVID. I added my wife as an employee to fill the spot. She is a member of the LLC. Can I consider her payroll towards the PPP forgiveness amount? No, Scott, you probably would not be able to include her because she's already technically, quote unquote, an employee by being a member of the LLC. But one of the things I would look into is losing your employee prior to COVID. You probably won't even get penalized for that because one of these safe harbors is if you lose an employee or if you let go of an employee and you offer them their job back and they decline, we need to do a written offer to them, then that does not count towards reduction. So whether that person quit, moved, or is gone, if I give him a written offer saying, hey, your job is available if you wish to come back, and they decline it, either outright decline it or decline it by not responding, then I've done my due diligence, and I don't even think you'd be penalized for that. A bit of a tricky one, but I think I would probably be able to lean on that if we needed to. Hey, Laura, the banks want their money back sooner than later, so I'm guessing they would be happy to accept forgiveness applications sooner than later. I agree with you 100%. So the way that the banks have been working on this is whatever money that you guys have right now is the bank's money. And so the bank had to give out their own money. The banks are not going to be able to get their money from the PPP, whether it's their money or their commission, until this application is forgiven. So I think these banks are going to be, clamoring to get this stuff done. Laura, we've been approved for EIDL. We don't need it right now, but might be in good insurance policy. The terms are a bit restrictive. Would you advise taking the loan? I would personally. If you got $500,000 at the bank and your shop does $1 million a year, then don't take it. If you got 50 grand in the bank, I'm taking it. We don't know what's going to happen. This world is crazy. It's getting crazier by the day. I would rather have that in my bank account, sitting aside, even if I'm going to pay interest on it and end up not needing it, than to get into a situation where I need it and I wasn't, and I look back and I'm kicking myself. So yeah, I would go ahead and get that. When I received the PPP loan, I had to sign a loan agreement. When I see the EIDL, I literally see the deposit in my account, no supporting documentation. Exactly right. We're living in a very bizarre world. Yeah. I'm guessing you're talking about the EIDL grant. The EIDL grant, there's no paperwork. When you got your EIDL loan, you did sign loan documents, or I would have hoped so. Deirdre, on an easy form, should we use FTE for putting the number of employees or raw number? My bank application just for to ask for a number of employees, not FTE. So it should be FTEs, right? Full-time equivalent employees. A lot of people's verbiage, they call it jobs, employees, FTEs. It should always be FTEs. So Scott, if you fired that person or let them go to lack of business, you're able to go back and try and right that wrong. Even if you're going to do it now today, it's not too late. And you're going to have to, you could say to them, hey, your job is available if you wish to come back. Now, if this is someone that you fired and you don't even want them back, then I probably wouldn't send that letter out, right? But yeah, I mean, if you cover yourself and you give that written offer, you've satisfied the requirement. Justin, I think that's your question is the same as what Scott was referencing, or similar situation. If your employee leaves, all you need to do is you need to offer them their job back, right? So if you offer them the job back and you say, hey, I'm going to give you an option to come back, as long as you want this person back, if they accept, you would say, hey, I'll give you an offer. It's valid for 3 days. At the end of the 3 days, if they decide to not come back, then hey, you know what? You've done your part and you've satisfied the requirement. Becky, we submitted an EIDL application but never heard anything back. Did anyone else have this experience? And so we have had several people do this. So the first thing that you need to do, Becky, is you need to look down through your email and see if you got an email from SBA Disaster. They sent out an email saying, hey, you need to set up your portal to move to the next process. A ton of people I've had have missed that because it's gone to spam. And they will not call you. They will just continue emailing you. But if it's going to spam, you might not be seeing it. That's the first place I would check. Second thing that I would do, as long as you have that EIDL application number, you can call the SBA up and ask them what the status is. If you call really early or sometimes really late, the wait time is not too bad. All right. Cool. So we've done another one of these. We're coming up to the end of the hour. Just want to thank everyone for joining me. Hopefully this was, informative. Hopefully it was not too over the top. A lot of stuff that we try to get to, a lot of information here. You know how to reach us. If you want to contact us through Facebook, email me. Anything that was not clear or you have a little bit more of a specific situation, please feel free to reach out and do whatever we can to help you make sure we get this straightened out. Really, hopefully, I think that maybe put your mind at ease a little bit. The easy application form is honestly what I've been asking for, of just, hey, make this simple. Just put the totals on there. Let's get rid of these tables. I mean, most of the stuff doesn't apply to most of the businesses that we're dealing with. And almost everyone was paying their people at least 75%. Almost everyone was at least trying to get back to full payroll before, with hiring employees. And so I think most people are going to be able to use this easy application that should be very straightforward to use. And then hopefully the banks just stamp on this, we're done with it, and we can just move on with this chapter of our life. And hopefully we'll never have to use this again, right? Awesome. Well, it was great seeing you guys all. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for the great questions. And everyone be safe out there, and I will talk to you all soon.